Well, thank you all for gathering here. Oh, sorry. Oh, no, that's okay. You can just leave it on question and answer time because I'll just, yeah. Well, thank you all for gathering here again. Thanks to all the folks who came here earlier. We're donating all of the VIP tickets to All People's Lutheran since we had so many St. John's people show up. Thought that would be a good partnership way for us to show that support. So, are we live yet on the live stream? Okay. Hello, live stream. Thank you for joining us. Y'all are up there. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. And Anna is going to try and get them over to me, but I'm going to talk for a little bit first. So don't ask questions yet. I guess you can, but nothing's going to happen to them. So, as I was saying earlier, it's kind of funny for me to be here, as this is just not. I never expected to be on this side of things, coming to All People's quite a few times. I was just somebody who's in the pews and used to being in that area. I didn't expect ever for roles to be switched. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about kind of the story of what brought me here. For some of y'all, this is old news. Like, my parents have probably heard this a few times before. So I just wanted to share a little bit of how kind of things happen in my life for me to end up here. And then we'll do a lot of question and answer time as well. So I had things pretty easy growing up. I would say I had a pretty good childhood. I didn't really have a lot of, outside challenges or anything like that. We went to church pretty regularly, and that was wonderful. I really enjoyed that, but it had a huge impact on me when we went to El Salvador when I was 12. That mission trip was something that really opened my eyes to the reality of the world. It showed me that the majority of the world's population exists with a level of poverty that I could not understand, that I wasn't familiar with. And there's a quote from John Bradford, and he sees somebody who is walking to the gallows, and he says, "But for the grace of God go I." And I think that all the time, that I'm just lucky, right? I didn't do anything to be born to such wonderful parents and growing up in such an amazing church with so many amazing people. I didn't do anything to be born into that setting to have all of the luck, I would say, that I have. And I kind of realized that when I'm playing with those kids from Los Héroes, just realizing, again, this could have been me in a different situation, right? And they didn't do anything to be born in that situation. I didn't do anything to be born in my situation. And in El Salvador is where I first heard about Oscar Romero, who was a Catholic archbishop who was assassinated by the agents from the Salvadoran government because he was speaking on behalf of the poor. And that was when Christianity kind of stopped being it became very real for me, very, very tangible in that sense, that it wasn't out of a sense of guilt or shame, but I realized that there could be a lot of joy in Christianity, that Christianity could be focused on liberation, right? Oh, this is the pages from the wrong note. And so I was reading more of Romero's works and reading more of the Bible and listening, and I was really inspired by one particular quote. I mentioned it earlier, that the true church cannot exist without being persecuted. And I saw the state of the church in the United States and saw how rarely the church in the United States was being persecuted, that pretty much everybody was getting along pretty well in their settings. And I started reading the teachings of Jesus, who is profoundly radical, who is more radical than we are always ready for, and contrasting the way that Christians often behaved in the larger world and the way that Jesus often behaved in the world. And it kind of became a fire, I would say, that was burning inside me, and realized, I think when I was 16, on a trip to the Boundary Waters, that I wanted to do one of three things. That I had decided I wanted to do social work, that I had wanted to do something in public policy, or that I was open to the idea of being a pastor. And in that moment, in this group where we're all kind of working together, I realized that a different way was possible. That was the thing that kind of inspired these three different paths available to me. And so I spent some time working in social work. I spent some time applying for programs to do policy work. I didn't get into any of those programs, and so as a result, here I am as a as a pastor. I don't know if the world would be better if I was a social worker or something like that. But as this is all happening, I am also I'm doing a lot of videos with one of my good friends, my best friend growing up, Dan Labonte. We did videos for everything. We did a Martin Luther video for a class project, right? This is back in like 2005, 2006, 2007. So like right at the baby age of YouTube. We didn't know about YouTube, or maybe we would have become YouTubers if we were born like 5 years later, but we were just making videos that nobody saw. We would record it onto a VHS and then like show our parents, and that was pretty much it. And it was a fun thing that I did kind of on the side for a while. And as this is happening, as I'm kind of feeling this call to serve in some capacity, recognizing how good I have things, I also started to question this idea of queerness being sinful, which is not something, I don't recall it ever being specifically taught, but it was something that was so much in the milieu that I had this thought in the back of my head, right, that queerness was identified with sinfulness, that's what the other kids at school said. That's certainly not what we said at our church, but it was something that was in the air. And thinking about these teachings of Jesus, if Jesus is telling us to always befriend the person who is marginalized, if Jesus is telling us that we should always be compassionate towards people that need compassion, then maybe this should change the way that I think about LGBTQ plus folks as well. So all of this is happening, kind of rolling around in the fishbowl of my brain. And then I went off to St. Olaf College. I signed up to be a philosophy major. My dad insisted I do something more practical. Maybe we remember these conversations differently. It was good advice, though. I'm not trying to blame you at all. But so I selected social work as well as my philosophy degree, and then ended up dropping that philosophy degree and just doing social work. As a result, I worked in the scene shop and theater, which was great fun, exposed me to a lot of queer kids that I was not exposed to necessarily in mock trial and Boy Scouts, which were the other two organizations that I was in. But spent a lot more time with these queer circles. I also did improv comedy for 4 years while I was at St. Olaf, and similarly, a lot of queer identities that existed that didn't exist in my mock trial group or in my Boy Scout group, or at least not open in either of those particular groups. And I just kind of realized and spent a lot of time acting and had a lot of fun with that acting that I was doing, and kind of dropped off that after graduating college. And then eventually kind of knew after that experience that I wanted to go to seminary eventually, that this is something that I wanted to try out, to dedicate my life to. So worked in social work for a few years, working with kids in the juvenile justice system, and then working with kids who have autism. So both very exciting and eventful at times, particular jobs, I would say. And I felt still like I wanted to go to seminary, that I felt that calling, that I could help out somebody a little bit in those particular calls, but if I could try and help create a loving community, that would do more work than the work that I was doing in social work. Not that social work is also equally important. I have a lot of heart for it. I think it's wonderful, but it just kind of was where I was feeling called to. And so went to seminary, had a great time. If I could just stay in seminary forever, I would. I absolutely loved it there. And I think eventually I'll probably go back for a doctorate, but that's neither here nor there. But go to seminary, have a great time, and then I start my first call, which is in a small town rural congregation in Granite Falls, Minnesota, at Granite Falls Lutheran, a town of 2,800 people. So I was living in Minneapolis for 6 years, right? Got very used to the way of being Lutheran in Minneapolis was, and moved out to this very small town. We talked about this a little bit earlier in the other session, and I came in way too hot to this small congregation and got myself in trouble almost immediately, for better or worse, which, if you've seen my videos, you can understand how that might have happened. So I start they call the associate before they call the senior pastor. So I was the associate. I was there for 9 months before they called the senior pastor, which is already kind of putting things on a little uneven ground. And of course, I start November 2019. And so I'm still like solo associate at that time when COVID hits in March of 2020. And we're walking through as a congregation, kind of just as I'm starting to get to know people, just as I'm starting to build trust with people, we shut down, basically, even out in tiny Granite Falls. We shut down a little later than everybody else shut down, but we did shut down nonetheless as a result of COVID. And it was a very useful experience for me, right? Because I wouldn't see the way people were reacting when I was preaching, and ended up saying a lot of things that kind of got me in trouble. And in retrospect, better ways I could have said a lot of those things. I think I could have done it in a more Christian and a more conciliatory way than the way that I had said things. So certainly some of that is on me. But as I'm saying these things, I'm kind of realizing this is the only place where people are hearing it, right? I went to Luther Seminary, and so I'm used to kind of like lefty progressive theology being all over the place, right? That was the milieu that I was in. And then go out to this place, and there's nobody that's saying these kind of things publicly. There's no one that's advocating for justice in that work publicly from a Christian perspective. And so I started posting on TikTok, oddly enough, in November of 2020. I think it was November of 2020 or 2021. I think it was 2021 that I started posting to TikTok, thinking I was too late for that the trend had passed already, and that it was just all dancing videos, and I was never going to be able to catch up as somebody who's in their 30s. And so started posting as kind of a release valve for me, right, so that I could say these things I felt like needed to be said, but also as a way of just trying to put it out into the ether, try to explain to people that there's a different way that we can be Christians together. It's been a wild journey. Again, not something I ever expected to go on my life. It seems like there's a lot of things that have kind of pushed me in this direction, a lot of people who have pushed me in this direction, but it's been a great joy as well. It's been a lot of fun. It's something that I didn't expect for my life. And we're going to move into question and answer time, but I just wanted to thank Sarah here for her work as admin. She's been fantastic. Wanted to thank Anna, my wife, for all of her work in supporting me. Anna is probably the one who has sacrificed the most because of me being on social media, because there are many late nights where Anna has to go to bed and I am up editing. Yeah, every night, yeah. So many thanks to her, thanks to my parents, thanks to my pastors, thanks to all of you for gathering here as well. So thank you all for being here. Thanks to all of you joining on the live stream. Appreciate you joining in on this journey as well. So do we have a handful of questions, Sarah, that you'd like to bring forward?
Can people hear me? Okay, very good. Well, firstly, speaking to the context that we're in right now at All Peoples, do you have a favorite memory from your time here?
Yeah, my mom said she was going to throw a softball in here for me, so thank you, Mom. I have to say, I think David Nunley playing music while we were all singing together, that's just every worship service that we got to do that. It was a lively and very energetic way of playing together that I really appreciated. That was one of my favorite memories, certainly from All Peoples. Do you have another one for me?
Yeah, now we're kind of diving into it.
I got one easy question.
What would you say the role of elders might be in our modern society? That's the question, and I might expand it to in the church moving forward.
One of the things that Anna, my wife, has talked about a few times is how profoundly impactful it was for her growing up to be in a daycare center where they had daycare center, but they also had a lot of folks from the nearby nursing care facility. Was this in the nursing home? Yes. Oh, the daycare facility was in the nursing home. Yes. And I think very often what we end up doing is kind of segregating based on age, right? We have like, these are where the elementary schoolers hang out. These are where retired folks hang out. These are where middle-aged folks hang out. And I don't think that does anybody any favors, quite honestly. I have a whole rant about cars and how cars are kind of the downfall of modern society, which we can go into if somebody really wants to hear me talk about. But I think a part of it is it's harder for us to interact with our neighbors. It's harder for us to see each other. And my hope going forward, right, is that we can start building those neighborhoods back up again, especially after COVID when really nobody was seeing each other. But elders do have an immense amount to add, a lot of experience, a lot of wealth of knowledge that folks can benefit from, and especially younger folks as they're kind of getting into their careers, as they're buying a house for the first time, as they're figuring out how to parent and all of this stuff. So I think we just need more, we need to create communities, and this is, I don't have any capacity to do this, so I'm just kind of encouraging other people to do this work, but we need to create communities where everybody has a sense of belonging, where a bunch of people can come from different backgrounds and all work together on kind of that common goal of living together. Did you have any other ones for me? Otherwise, we'll just...
I do. And can I expand on that one just a hair?
Yeah, please.
I was working in the La Crosse Area Synod office for a program called the Engaging Children's Initiative, and something you said, Pastor Paul, really stood out. Because even within our church spaces, we tend to see a segregation by age. So the kiddos come in, and oftentimes they are shepherded away immediately to a different space, as if that main space was not meant for them. And so we were kind of exploring how can we more authentically and faithfully have intergenerational worship experiences where kids are being engaged in worship and prayer alongside the rest of the congregation, so that because that's a huge amount of testimony and stories and witness that these kids should get to hear, but oftentimes we just have that tendency to split everybody up. So we've been exploring, what does intergenerational ministry look like?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks. Sorry, I had to check with Anna and make sure the live stream camera could see me if I was standing over here. Over there, standing at the podium makes it feel like I'm preaching at all of you, which I'm not doing. I'm trying not to do right now.
And thinking again towards the future, where might you see the future of progressive Christianity going?
Yeah, I think it's always going to be important for Christian communities to be rooted in place. And very often what we end up doing is, that's kind of my worry when we do stuff all online or when we do things that are remote, is that we lose that sense of place, we lose that sense of community. And so I do think that's going to be crucial going forward. I think we're going to see a lot more house churches. I think that's going to be a reality. We're going to see a lot more kind of loosely Christian affiliated groups, right? Groups that are getting together for protests and things of that nature. I think that's also going to be a factor going forward. I see a lot of decentralization happening, for better or worse. I think the ELCA has done a pretty good job being a very centralized structure, but that also causes some problems. It makes it really hard to move things. It makes it really hard to move nimbly, if I'm trying to use like corporate speak. And there's a lot of good things to that too, right? But I think the future of progressive Christianity is going to have a more decentralized, more localized, and smaller like impact, or a smaller like community center to it.
I would ask if there's any follow-up questions to that response. Otherwise, we can open it up if people have any kind of theological question about Paul's history. Yeah.
Things that got wrong. Do you want to go around with the mic?
My question is, the evangelicals in general say they are so persecuted and, bring back, look how terrible everyone is to us. What's your take on it, and why do they feel that way, and how do we change anything? Talk to us for the next 10 hours.
Sure. Yeah. It feels really good for people to call themselves a victim. There's a lot of value in that, to consider yourself victimized, right? That it allows you to feel a self-righteousness. It allows you to feel anger. It allows you to hold judgment on other people, right? And so I think there's a lot of motivation to feel like people are persecuting you, even when there's dubious evidence as to the persecution of evangelicals, especially in the United States. So I think that's part of it, and I would hope that we can point to Christians who are actually being persecuted, right, and point towards folks that are actually encountering threats on their life, especially in the global church, especially when you look at North Korea and China and other places like Malaysia, for example, a country that Anna and I visited, you're not allowed to publicly preach about Christianity and you risk jail time basically if you go there, which is part of the reason why I didn't record any TikToks while I was in Malaysia. I just didn't think they were gonna count that, but I just figured there's a lot of places where Christians do indeed face persecution, and I would hope that we could hold up those places like a mirror and say, like, this is actually what persecution looks like, right? It looks like people coming into your village and killing you, not just like people not allowing you to pray in school or things of that nature. Does that kind of get at what you were? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I think specificity is so valuable when we are encountering folks that I wouldn't just say generally, oh, this is a group that's being persecuted, but like, let's talk about the Coptic Christians who exist in Egypt, right? Who face a huge amount of persecution and have their churches bombed and have had various threats upon them. And this is a church that's historically faced a lot of persecution, right? That we can point to their witness and say that this is what actual persecution looks like, not, again, this other stuff. But I think being specific is much better than generally speaking. Like, nobody changes their mind because somebody speaks a platitude at them. But I think when we can specifically lift up examples, I think that has a lot of value.
We also learned in seminary stories are the best way to aid deconstruction, hearing people's real stories. I always think about that. Does anyone else have a question?
If we have any questions from alive, I don't know. All right. Yeah, please. Thank you.
First of all, thank you for coming here and visiting us and hanging out. Really appreciate it. My question, and part of my, I think, sort of mission in life is trying to help people get along and understand each other. So I wrote it down, but it's pretty dark. How do we welcome and show inclusion to folks who are more politically and religiously conservative? Because I think of racism, sexism, and all the other isms, and I'm afraid that we're turning into like a political ism or a religious ism. You know, you don't think the same way I do, so I don't even want to go sit next to you.
Yeah, definitely. I think the struggle of progressive Christianity is to avoid that self-righteousness that exists, because it is very easy for us to just say, and I do this too, it's very easy for us to say, this group is bad inherently, right? And I have nothing to learn from them. And so I'm going to shut them out. I'm not going to listen to them when they speak. I'm going to cut them out from my life entirely. The inconvenient part is that's not what Jesus calls us to do, right? Like, when he said love your enemies, he's not just kind of like speaking hypothetically. He literally means that we're supposed to love the people that we consider our enemies. And this is always, I think, the challenge, is that the people that we encounter who have different perspectives than us, even if those perspectives are dehumanizing or profoundly dehumanizing, we still have a call to love them. And this is the challenge of the church, right? We need to set some boundaries to keep for safety, right? Like, that's a part of the reality, that you can't have a church where somebody goes around like whacking people over the head. And also, like, we want to have a variety of different voices in the church, and setting that boundary of what is okay to say and what's not okay to say. Because it is, I fully agree, we've gotten really bifurcated in our society to the point where I probably have less conservative friends now than I've ever had in my life. And I would imagine that's true for my conservative friends as well. And getting to the question, it kind of gets to that question of elders, right? Is how do we create community where people's paths will cross, right? Because I know I'm not going to meet new conservative friends when I'm going and protesting, right? They're going to be flicking me off from their trucks. Like that's not, they're not going to be inviting me for cocktails or something like that. But figuring out how do we witness to the gospel, witness to this important justice work, and also create spaces that are a little more neutral, or create spaces where you can interface with each other. And that might be like, hey, we both care, like Ducks Unlimited. This is a funny example to use, but it's very apropos for me being in southwestern Minnesota. Ducks Unlimited is a great group that does a lot of conservation efforts, right? I'm not a duck hunter. I'm a vegetarian myself, so it's not like I would do a lot of, I'm not one of the target markets of Ducks Unlimited, but they buy up a lot of land. They do a lot of conservation, right? And that's a group where I could see like aligning with, right? Even though most of the people there wouldn't be aligned with me. It's figuring out what are the things that are bigger than any one. What are the things that are bigger than our individual differences? That's like a kind of a generic politician answer. I'm sorry, but did you have anything you wanted to follow up
I
with?
just think that we subdivide ourselves so much that I think what you said about creating a neutral space, which is what I would hope that this building and this place could be, so that if a conservative Christian walked through the door, they would feel welcome, maybe challenged, but welcome and loved. And you're right. I mean, I agree with you, what Jesus taught us. And if you look, he didn't tell us very much about pointing out what's wrong with everybody else. More of his preaching was get yourself straight. So that, I guess if we can use the theology in ways that connect us all, like we have a sign out there. Well, we don't have it out there yet. We will have it out in a couple days. The old one blew down, so we're putting a new one out. But the bottom of the sign says, "My commandment is that you love one another."
Definitely, yeah. And that's always the challenge that we face, right? Of loving each other and also holding on to everybody's humanity, right? That, yes, we all love each other, and there's certain things, certain boundaries sometimes that you have to set in a community, which is really hard to do, but also important for safety. But yeah, it's a tricky thing. It's something that the church has wrestled with for a long time, and we're especially wrestling with it right now.
Yeah, and I think the thing with communion too, and I talked to Pastor Evan about this too, the communion, how, I'm not the right kind of Lutheran to have communion at some churches. Yeah. I feel like that's sort of, that kind of bugs me a lot. And I asked Pastor who he wouldn't give communion to. And he said he'd give communion to pretty much everyone, except maybe like an unrepentant Nazi came in, might not be comfortable. We'd have to have a talk with them first. But I look at it like that. I mean, Jesus gave communion to Judas.
Yeah. That's one of the things that Sarah says all the time, that Judas ate, right, at the Last Supper. Jesus knows what's going to happen. He fed him.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for the question.
Maybe while folks are thinking up more questions, I can feel it. My follow-up would be, and something that you might encounter a lot on the TikTok lives, how do you approach, because I really appreciated what he said about all people should feel welcome, and this should be you should be able to create a quote on like neutral space. But what about for the people that for whom any sort of progressive thought about loving more people feels so violent and so challenging to them? How do we start to engage with those people? That's something that comes up pretty much every week.
Yeah, I think there's different levels to engagement, right? You probably wouldn't want to show somebody who's like vehemently MAGA my videos. I don't think they would respond well to, they don't. I can testify to that. Like, I am not the right person to move them a degree, right? I might be the right person to move somebody else like a degree over, but encouraging moderate voices as well. Unfortunately, like, if you come on TikTok or any social media platform as a moderate, you just don't do well. Like, nobody, like, nobody comes on social media for like moderate, like measured takes, like really healthy, loving everybody takes. Like, it's just not popular on social media. But there are other people who can kind of do that work, right? That we see ourselves, like, I exist in a certain point and I'm trying to move people towards justice. And I recognize a lot of the people that watch my videos aren't going to necessarily want to be moved. But there is a portion of the population that I can try and help think about things in a slightly different way.
I'll try to frame a question that kind of pulls together a few of the different things that we're talking about. Earlier in the evening, we talked about, obviously, the religious right, conservative fundamentalism, and kind of that tie to the Republican Party. You know, on the flip side of things, a lot of times when we think about progressives or leftists, right, they tend to be more secular or anti-church completely. By the latest numbers, you know, we have 30% of the United States, or 100 million people now, that are technically called nuns. So kind of bringing these pieces together, yes, how do we get the message of Jesus, the progressive, you know, true message of the gospel out there, connecting with people that recognize that message but don't want to have anything to do with the label of Christianity?
Yeah, it's a challenge because you see, we haven't seen a lot of like progressive leaning, faith-based Democrats, I would say, for like progressive leaning politicians who advocate for the policies that they advocate because of their faith. We have James Tallarico, right, who is really popular in Texas and is doing a really good job of doing that work. But beyond that, like, we have a lot of politicians who, more on the left side of things, don't really focus on faith as much. And I think there is an importance to have a separation of church and state, right? I'm never going to endorse anybody on any of my platforms. If you do see an endorsement, just know that somebody paid me a whole lot of money. That, like, I got enough money to retire and live a different life if that's the case. But I can't imagine a situation where I would do that. But I think some of it is actually happening right now, that people saw in Minneapolis a lot of faith leaders, a lot of ELCA pastors, like, literally putting their bodies on the line and saying to people, I'm willing to get arrested when it's minus 20 degrees out at the airport. And it's like, is it a symbolic arrest? Yes, it's a symbolic arrest. Like, the police didn't have to arrest them. They could have just ignored them. But that imagery of clergy going out and being about that work, about being about justice work, I think is making an impact on the people in Minneapolis. And I know, like, Holy Trinity in Minneapolis with Pastor Ingrid Rasmussen, they're seeing new members come in, because people who have never been a part of the church before, because they saw that the church was active with this work. But the church has to be doing that, and also has to, like, figure out the PR portion of it as well. That's the tricky thing. I think we've been doing this work for a very long time. And you look at a place like All People's, right, that's been doing this kind of activist work for a long time, for over 30 years. And but we don't always do the best job of, like, giving ourselves PR because the systems aren't in place for that, right? We talked earlier about, like, the rigid hierarchies that exist. The people on top don't want to lift up stories like All People's. They don't want to lift up stories like Redeemer over in North Minneapolis that's doing really important holy work, because that undermines the whole system when you have people coming together and working for justice. So I think progressive Christians just have to be a lot more creative in how we reach out. The traditional systems are never going to work for our benefit in the way that, like, the 700 Club. There's, like, never going to be a progressive Christian version of the 700 Club that exists. Like, it just doesn't. it's just not the way that things are set up. So that's, I think, the challenge of being about that work and also telling people that we're about that work, because we haven't, I think we're really, especially like ELCA Lutherans in the Midwest, we're really good about being humble to our own detriment, so that people don't know that we're trying to do this work, right? Like, so that's something that we maybe have to be a little more shameless about. I'm always encouraging us to be more humble. I think that's really valuable, but also you can be so humble to the point that nobody knows what's happening, right? And we need people to know that this kind of work is happening, because it isn't just like one person. Sometimes people see like one person protesting or one clergy out in protesting, and then they change and they start coming to church all of a sudden. But I think it needs to be a repeated thing that they see again and again, sometimes on social media, sometimes in person, sometimes in their local community, that this church cares about justice work, or this church cares about liberation of people. This church feeds people, right? Like all peoples does, all days of the week. So there's my kind of long-winded answer for you. Sorry, Chris. Does that kind of mostly get at what you're asking, or any follow-ups?
I think it's a hard issue. I don't know that there is any easy answers.
Yeah. Yeah, like Father John Coughlin did a really good job of using the radio and ended up using the radio to spread kind of fascist propaganda towards the back half of his life. But he was one of the first people to adopt radio, and so his sermons went out to millions of Americans, right? It's estimated while he was preaching that it was something like a quarter to half of Americans listened to his sermons as they were being preached, because he was the first one there, right? He kind of got the early adopter advantage. He got to radio before everybody else did, and we see kind of a lot of conservative evangelicals have gotten to TV before. Certainly, like, I don't know if there are any Lutheran programs that were ever running on on television. Davy and Goliath, yeah. Yep. So there was. Yeah. Yeah. And so figuring out mass media is something that progressive Christians have to do, and we can access it through social media and doing that kind of work. So my hope is that I can encourage a lot of other folks to be doing this kind of work, because you don't want to just hear my voice on there. There's a lot of other voices that need to be on social media too. Yeah.
I keep talking.
No, I like having questions.
My question is not Christians, whatever, but so often I remember sitting in Bible study groups and stuff like that, and people try and say that it's only Christians. You know, unless you're doing your good works by being a Christian, they're nothing, whatever. But it's like, well, what about the atheist? What about the Jewish person? What about the Muslim? Can't they do good works? Why do we preach that? Or was it just what I was hearing? And how do we encourage everyone to do good works, whether it's, you know, a very mega person or a very anti-mega person or whatever, that good works and helping people. And you don't have to love Jesus.
Yeah.
That sounds terrible in a church setting, but you don't have to love Jesus in order to feed someone or do something good.
And I think that's the advantage when you have churches that do social programs, that do community work, right? Like I know of a church in La Crosse, Our Saviors, that does similar meal, right, where they feed a lot of unhoused people, and that becomes an invitation for people who don't belong to the church whatsoever, but they want to be a part of that. I think anybody who humanizes other people is an ally. So anybody who sees the humanity in somebody else, that is somebody that we can partner with and work with, right? And again, the hope of the church is that we continue to find these allies, find these people who are humanizing others, and continue doing that humanization work together, and recognize, like, yeah, believe me, I would love it if everybody like involved in the church had like a super rigorous like Lutheran understanding, and everyone involved in the service projects the church does has a super rigorous understanding, but people are hungry to do good, I'll say. My internship site was Fabric, which was formerly known as Jacob's Well over in Minneapolis, which is one of the church starts that started in the early 2000s and then it has kind of been holding on ever since. And we would do a service project after, it was like January 3rd. It was the Sunday after Christmas. So we had our big Christmas celebration, right, where everybody came out, and then we had this, we would do like a volunteer event, basically, kind of like a Feed My Starving Children thing, where we would all gather together and do a bunch of meals. And that was always better attended than the Christmas service, which is kind of wild to me. Like, we would have 400 people show up. We would have like 250 at Christmas, but we would have 400 people show up. And we would see people comment on the page, hey, I'm going to this, and then tag somebody else, do you want to come? People we had never seen before, like, have no relationship with the church whatsoever. They saw it on a community event or something like that. And so I think there's also, this is a space when we talk about evangelism. Evangelism isn't just like, come to my church, but also like, do good with me. This is something that we can do together. That's the hope. And then maybe some of those people also become members of the church, but it'd be nice. I like it when we have a lot of people to sing together. Sorry, go ahead.
I have a question from the live stream from Tim Muth. He asks,
Hi, Tim.
or he says, hi from El Salvador. Glad to have been with you on the trip when you were 12.
Can attest, yeah.
And he says, my question is, what is the role of the pastor today to speak to these challenging social justice topics in sermons on Sunday?
Yeah, this is something that we talked about earlier during the earlier event, that pastors get kind of squeezed, that sometimes we are the only person giving these voices of justice in our communities. And also somebody has to say that. Somebody has to say this. Somebody has to speak against racism. Somebody has to speak against the anti-immigration sentiments we have. And I think the role of the pastor, like I was saying earlier, is not to like yank somebody up by their roots and move them like totally a different place than where they are, but to figure out what's the minimum amount of change that I can create in this person's heart, right? What's the minimum that I can possibly do to change their mind just a little bit on this particular thing? And I'll admit, it's not something I'm good at. I tend to be more of the root yanker and transplanter myself rather than like, okay, how can we move this person 1 inch on this issue, or how can we get them to humanize somebody? One of the rules that I came up with for myself for preaching, after I had like preached too many times about justice issues, I guess, was I would talk about something if it involved our local community, right? And I could talk about any justice issues in our local community because that felt like this is something that we have access to. I am talking about this because we encounter racism in the area that I was in. And I found that to be really helpful because it roots the conversation. Instead of people having to feel bad for all of these things that are happening, because it is overwhelming, all the awful things that are happening in the world, we can make changes in our community here. So I think that's the twofold role of the pastor, is figuring out, one, how do I move people gently, which again, easier said than done, I'll say. And then how do we point to our communities and point to justice work that is happening, that needs to happen in our communities? I'm sure Tim will give me a follow-up. He can cross-examine me. Yeah, sounds good. Good to see you, Tim. Any other questions? Yeah. Definitely, yeah, like Pastor Evan was talking about earlier, not just being reactive, right? But what could the kingdom of God look like, right? the kingdom of God looks like a block party, right? Where everybody is gathering around, where we bring food, where there's somebody who's like playing music really like too loud, but we still let them in anyway. Like there's somebody gossiping over here and we're like, okay, let's tamp that down a little bit. But it's a gathering, it's a joyous gathering. There's something that happened in Minneapolis called Porch Fest. I don't know if it happens in any other cities, but in Minneapolis there's this thing called Porch Fest where they would just shut down certain residential streets and these bands, I don't know where they came from. They're, I'm sure, local bands that like of just random people that came together. But these local bands would play on people's porches, and then people would just walk down the middle of the street, right? Because it's closed off to traffic. And you could hear this random like progressive jazz band playing over here, and then you have like a math rock band over here, and like all the genres that you never knew existed were represented. And it just felt to me like this is what the kingdom of heaven looks like, right? This is what the kingdom of God looks like, a place where everybody gets to gather and celebrate. And I fully agree, Pastor Chris. I think it's very easy to get focused on the negative, and in many ways we are some of the few people that cast hope. That it's very easy to get people hooked on this idea of fear. But if we can cast hope, that can create a whole new world. Any other questions or follow-ups that folks have? All right. I'm good to end things. Let's close in a prayer, if y'all will join me in prayer. If you feel comfortable with it, no pressure. Holy God, we pray that your Spirit would move amongst us, that it would always be nudging us towards compassion, that it would be always pointing us towards justice and mercy, that every time we see somebody as an enemy, we might see your face in their face, that every time we feel self-righteous, we might be reminded of your humility and your compassion, that we might be reminded of all of the joy that you bring into the world, to celebration of a kingdom of God that is always yet to come, that we get to glimpse from time to time. We pray that we might all be faithful workers in that kingdom, that we might all work for justice and mercy and compassion, and that we all might be drawn towards you. In your name we pray. Amen. Well, thank you all for gathering here. We'll be around to chat for a little while longer. I'm guessing the St. John's crowd will be here to chat for a long time.